Hello, welcome to SMAF. So this week we have the Women in Streaming Media taking over. The guys have kindly enough given us the keys to the kingdom, and we've got an interesting conversation going on in this slightly impacted virus-prone world. So what's going on today is we've got Heather talking about some of her experience in the sales and machine learning side. We've got Tracy talking about her involvement in the TV of Tomorrow conference that she runs. We've got Ginger talking about her background in the user experience in engineering and what she feels is kind of interesting trends that you need to be involved with. And we've got CJ talking about ad tech, which is always a complicated type of thing that people need to kind of wrap their heads around. As well, Peggy has been the one to organize all this, and thank you very much, Peggy, as well as Dom and all the rest of the guys for giving me the reins for today. So unfortunately, we had a little technical issue, but Dom's fixing it for me, and we will have the continuation of an incredibly interesting conversation. Please stay tuned. One of the reasons we got these people together was we thought it was an interesting approach to cover some of the topics that we thought were topical in streaming. And so, like I said, we've got people who are involved on the UX side with Ginger. We've got Tracy, who's involved in the presentation of information about the streaming industry. We've got Heather on the machine learning and AI interests. We've got Peggy, who's also on the go-to-market within the streaming industry. And am I missing somebody? I'm missing nobody. Okay.
No, you're missing You're missing CJ in the advertising.
CJ. I don't see CJ. Okay. CJ in the advertising side of things and for the ad tech. And then I work as well in some of the information and the program management for streaming. So since I was out of the office temporarily, I wanted just to do the little bit of an intro that we had planned to do. One of the things that's happening, obviously, is in my hometown, which is Seattle, Amazon and some of the other companies, I think, are asking workers to stay home, and so that they actually have the ability to, if they can work with groups remotely, to do that. So realistically, some of the tools that people use now for both entertainment and I'm watching, sports are the kinds of things that can be now used in the office. I mean, I think that probably each and every one of us has spent a good amount of our week on conference calls. But if you think, in fact, since now it's more of a must-have for people, what do you think is like the one thing you can encourage people to do when they're doing a kind of a conference call or a presentation that keeps the flow of information going and keeps the call interesting? And the only reason I bring this up is because it looks like we might be doing a lot more on the streaming side. Tracy, for instance, is there something that you can think of that would help people make it a better experience?
I think that's a great question. I've been looking at these online platforms recently. Before I answer what I think they need to do, the key problem with these streaming platforms is that people get bored. The conversation isn't dynamic enough. Mm-hmm. They get distracted. They need to do their email, right? So there's nothing really keeping you from being disconnected, because the problem is you aren't listening carefully, and therefore you're going to miss the conversation. So I would suggest, if you're going to have a work conference experience like this, or an event or something like that, you need to keep people engaged through contests or games or something graphical. There's got to be some innovation here to keep people, some incentive, ways for people to network, ways for people to meet others and not be necessarily just locked into sitting and listening all the time, as much as I love what we're doing now. But I think people are going to have to gamify.
Okay. For gamify, so what about gamify in a corporate environment? How do they do that?
I think you're going to have to innovate, create maybe a point structure, benefits. You have to make it fun. I mean, isn't that what Silicon Valley is always doing? Mm-hmm. They're going to have to bring all of those sort of incentives that they have, in the office, like massages and bring your pet and all that kind. I don't know what, but you're going to have to maybe create a point system. I remember a project in the 90s that was at the American Film Institute. It was a prototype, and it was brought in by Turner Classic Movies people, and it was really one of my favorite things I've ever seen. And although it's not necessarily related to like a streaming experience like this, they took the idea of a streaming channel and they built a mogul competition. So they figured out a way to gamify you to get you to watch more of their movies, and the goal was to build up points to get to become the mogul. I don't remember all the ramifications of that project, but it was compelling. It was absolutely compelling. If you like movies, if you're, so
Okay.
I think they should figure out a way to motivate people to, I don't know, participate more.
I think, so interestingly, I think one of the interesting things, so we all have these conferencing systems, right? So whether you use Zoom or you use Skype or you use whatever, right? And so many of us, I know from a business perspective, just use it from the audio perspective. So you can multitask while you're talking because they can't see what you're doing. But one of my clients has recently said, well, when we're using one of these conference platforms, we need to have video because we want to make sure you're paying attention.
I think the video is that the video aspect is so key, because if you're a remote employee, like right now, we're all in, 6, 7 different locations, but it feels like we're all together. And I think that's going to be a key aspect, is taking that stigma off of the remote employee, perhaps.
So we may be taking a short break just as we reboot, but don't worry, we're going to continue talking and hope to kind of have a engaging conversation here. So, I think the camera itself is actually very important because it shows that you're engaged. And not only that, but, one of the things. We may be actually being rebooted as we speak and having a slight technical problem. So we should be back now. And let's see if I can get Ginger to kind of come to give us her insight. Take yourself off mute, Ginger, and give us your kind of ideas as to what you think will engage people.
Let's see. I think it was Heather who mentioned it was like having everyone there, like having all of like the thumbnails.
I'm having an audio problem. Is anybody having an audio problem? Unfortunately, no. Okay, so we've got a couple of things going on here. I think we're being taken over by a system that is now normal, but previously wasn't. Okay, so let's see who's back here. I'm here. And can we see if anyone else is here? Okay. So one of the things I think that is interesting is that as people, in fact, often have to sit here and figure out whether or not their audio is working. So let's just do that. We can actually go back on and see if I've got audio.
So we can hear you fine.
The question is,
we can hear you.
I think what's happened today is we have so many people working at home online. But no, we're not. We're still there. Okay.
I think we can liken some of this too to video conferencing to CCD because technology gets better on both sides.
Okay, so you can hear me. So I'll continue talking.
Nadine, can you hear us? Can you hear any of us?
I'm still having some issues here. Peggy, why don't you take over for a second? Well,
Yeah. So I think that Nadine's having a hard time hearing us. We can hear her, and I think we can hear each other. So, Ginger, I know that Nadine asked a question about how to make the use.
You were just mentioning something about technology. What was it?
No, if you guys can hear me, I was just saying that.
Okay, you know what the problem is? I'm going to have to reboot.
Yeah.
And just to finish that thought, it's interesting that we're having these technical difficulties now, because I feel like with CTV, you know, I work in the ad tech space. I've been on the publisher side for a long time, and the user experience piece, we get a big pass on the CTV side of things. You can see a slate on AT&T and Sling and so forth, and you let it go. And then when you see 28 seconds of black and the Super Bowl on NBC 2 years ago, you're like, wait, what happened? So I think just going back to these technical difficulties, you know, there's a pass here where you're doing it digitally, and as the technology on the back end gets better, we will not have these types of issues on video conferencing, and I think the CTV side of things will also get a lot better. I know at the company I'm at now, we have Zoom rooms. I'm not using one now, but you just hit a button and it comes on. The last place I worked at, we had a Polycom phone in the middle of everyone, and I had 30 employees around the country trying to dial in. So just comedic relief a little bit. I think this is telling of just where technology is going. It's good. We're in the toddler phase of both video conferencing and CTV. So I'll give it back, Nadine, if you're back.
Okay, if I'm lucky, I'm back. Am I back? Excellent.
We can hear.
Good to be back. I'll just be dropping in and out of this conference because realistically, we want to keep you on your toes, and nothing says more, what am I following, by making sure that the person who's moderating just disappears occasionally. So in terms of topics, one of the things I think that's happening, obviously, is we've got a situation where people on conference calls sometimes aren't paying attention, but realistically, we want to talk a little bit more about streaming in general. And in case we're repeating what I'm talking about, initially, one of the reasons why we invited people like CJ, Heather, Ginger, Tracy, and Peggy on was to talk about the things that they like and that they're interested in. And one of the questions that came up was, people often have questions about either getting into the industry or about what you do, or maybe there's another question. So what I want to kind of touch on is, what are some of the most common questions that people ask you about your work in this industry? So I'll start off with Heather. Heather, you know, what do you feel as a question that kind of comes up over and over again?
I think, so for me, I'm a working mom. I have 4 kids. I have an 8th grader, a 6th grader, a 3rd grader, and a 1st grader. And so I get the question all the time is, how are you able to make work and family and everything else for yourself work? And I was really fortunate early in my career when I had my first son that I worked for a gentleman that was very encouraging and said, just come back from maternity leave and try, versus making a decision before you even know what it's like. And so I think for everybody, it's a different, you know, every family and every situation has a different rhythm. So I say, what works for me might not work for somebody else, but I consistently get the message is, how are you able to, one, stay in the workplace and not leave and be able to manage everything? And it wasn't always pretty. I mean, it's definitely a lot of a juggling act, and definitely being pretty diligent and having some understanding family and understanding colleagues at time. But also, how were you able to be honest about it? I mean, I think we're just starting to have these conversations about women in the workplace, and, you know, I have 4 kids. If one of them is sick, do I have to make up some type of a tall tale but why I'm leaving, or am I able to be honest and forthcoming? And I try to lead with that my family and is most important. And if they're thriving, I always tell people, if my family is thriving and I'm thriving, then the system is just going to keep on working. Now, it's not always pretty for me or my husband in the background, but that's what I always, that's the consistent question I get. I think maybe because people know that I have 4 kids. Maybe they're asking me why I have that many kids, but that is the question I get. And I think I've been really fortunate in the streaming industry. I mean, when I started, it was a long time ago, so I wasn't even married, and I didn't have any children. And I was fortunate to work. I've been really fortunate to work for some people who were along with the same journey. And so they were experiencing the same things. And it's just really being able to encourage open dialogue and saying that it's okay to have 4 children and it's okay to be a working mom. Mm-hmm. And like I said, every family has a different situation. And then the second question I always get is moms who have chosen to step out of the workforce, how they can get back in and how difficult that is. And I have a ton of really qualified friends who chose to take time off to, prioritize their family. Not that you're deprioritizing if you go to work, but it made sense for their family. And they're struggling to get back into the workplace. And that penalty tax, I say, for that stay-at-home penalty tax, you have the education and you have the experience, but because you took, whether it be 1 or 5 or 10 or 20 years off, there's a tax for you to get back in. And that, I really struggle with that, how hard it is for women to get back into to get back to work. So I would love to see us come together as women in streaming media to pay attention to that and to help people.
I think the technical skills and being able to make sure that you're staying up to date is really important, because even if you're not necessarily working a job right now, there are so many different ways that you can actually continue to improve your technical skills. I mean, you will have to sit down and do it, but there are things like our conferences, any of the resources that are out there online. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. There's a new Slack channel that was created a couple of years ago for video dev, which I find really fascinating to read. CJ, how about you? What kinds of questions do you get? Or what's your common kind of question that you think about from people?
Sure. So common questions that I get when I tell someone that I either work in broadcasting or, now that I'm at an ad tech company, a lot of people think that, when I worked at NBC, they thought I worked on air. And now that I'm at an ad tech company, people are like, what is that? And the general statement has been, look, I've helped facilitate advertising hitting the glass, whether it's phone or television, the last 10 years. And prior to that, like I said, I was born out of traditional media. I grew up loving television, was a TV geek in college, worked in this TV studio. So trying to marry that love of television to, the business side of the operation. And a lot of times, aside from what do you do, it's, why is the ad experience so bad? Digital gets a bad rap. You go on to a website and you have a great content, and yet you have, 4 300 by 250, sized ads on the right-hand side, all repeating the same advertiser. When you're moving into streaming, which, a lot of our stuff was born out of display on the digital side, but you move into streaming, you can't apply all the same logic that you did with display. You can't have 4 back-to-back ads for Chevy. There's a precedent here with linear television. I'm a huge fan of the word convergence, because I feel like a bet I made 10 years ago coming to New York, leaving linear traditional broadcast and coming into digital, I'm seeing now the fruits of that labor, and it's exciting. I know we still see ads that come up. It's the user experience on CTV, for example. I would love to kill the slate. I would love that all the technology partners in the entire ecosystem.
Oh wait, kill the slate. What does kill the slate mean? Kill the slate. What does that mean?
Well, so I say kill the slate. So, like I said before, if you saw 28 seconds of black on NBC during Super Bowl, that's a problem. Whether you're myself working in the States or you're someone that's just watching it at home, like my dad, that's a real problem. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, could go many ways with this. What happens is, with the slate, you see that on anywhere, any Samsung TV device that you're watching an app, the experience has, the slate. You're watching, this channel. And that should have been ad space. So I guess the continuity of the experience on CTV, and even on other devices when you're watching long form content, for example, that we're going to get better at that. But and with that, I want to kill the slate. When you see that's a missed opportunity, and you wouldn't see that on the actual experience on television. So let's kill it.
Okay, so,
I mean,
so you're not, I get it. So essentially it's a missed ad opportunity. I mean, since you're here, CJ, I want to see if anybody else actually, just to interrupt the initial kind of focus, does anybody else have questions about the kind of digital ad experience, or questions about what's going on in terms of what you need to kind of be informed about? Because it's an area where you guys have your own language, just like the streaming industry has a lot of jargon itself, but the ad side is even further removed, from my experience at least, that a lot of people just don't have the technical knowledge to go in and kind of even ask the right questions. Do any of you have questions for CJ, since she's kind of gone into a good amount of detail about, you know, what's going on in her area?
Are you working in with ACR technology
So
or interactive ads?
that is a part of the full suite. So coming from, I'll speak more of the company I work for currently. I'm going to throw a couple acronyms out. It's an SSP, a supply side platform. What that does is it helps publishers facilitate the pipes for programmatic advertising. So that's what I'm doing right now, is looking at how do you get Brightline or Innovid ads through the programmatic pipe so that a large broadcaster or video content provider, you know, can run that in their experience. So that's what I'm currently doing. But as far as like ACR, all these things we're trying to figure out collectively, whether you're on any part of the Lumascape, so to speak. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but I love the Lumascapes.
The Lumascape is this major thing. I mean,
yeah.
Explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you know, the team at Luma Partners have put together something called the Lumascapes, and they've been around for a while, and they update them frequently, and they basically break out from marketer to publisher, and the publishers being anyone from broadcasters to digital first, you know, content providers, what tech sits in each part of the supply chain. So from when you create an ad and it's you know, a Ford ad and send it through the pipes, I'll call them, it lines out all of it very well. But anyway, so going back to your question around just, you know, there's a lot that can go through all the different technology pieces that are facilitated. It's a lot. Look, I got to be honest. There's a lot more on the programmatic side that I've learned about in the last year. Coming from the publisher, you work in your ad server, you set things live in that system. Understanding and getting into programmatic has been one of the best things I've ever done, because it's still there's still a long way to go with video and CTV, and we're still just figuring it out. So I kind of got off topic there, but let me pass this back.
I want to, in fact, so just before we go to the next person here, so realistically, this is a Lumascape, and this is one of them. There's many of them. But if you look at this, you can see that there are so many people involved. And so this is one of the issues that we have about delivering content. And what's happening is that there's a huge amount of technology involved. Let me jump over to Ginger, because like I said, each of us works in one specific area. But Ginger, what's one of the common questions you get? It could be about your job, it could be about something else. But since you're kind of on the engineering and the user experience side, I want to get your take on this.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, well, before I started at Philo, I was working actually in display ads for quite a long time, and then I switched over to a video company, and it was just learning about video and dealing with video and like TV platforms was actually quite a whole new experience for me. And every day I get asked, since I switched jobs, like, oh, hey, how's work? You know, kind of small talk, but like, and I can actually, you know, tell my friends like, yeah, work's been very interesting. There's a lot of interesting problems to solve, things I never thought about. For example, like I'd been working in just traditional web development for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And then now I've been more coding interfaces for TV and learning how to use a remote, you know, and to like navigate around the TV. And it's like a whole different mindset on like how to control like like a focus item, like a focus with a remote, instead of like a mouse that you could just like move around and click on things. And that, like, there's a period with that when I was heavily involved in like working on Android TV, and like trying to convert the web interactions and the way I coded for web into TV, and solving for focus issues that comes up a lot at work, actually almost every week.
So it's people kind of understanding what the medium is that is now being used, right? Because there's such a difference in between, using one device versus the other, right?
Yeah. So yeah, using one device, like a lot of times we're used to using, our laptops or computers with a mouse, and we scroll around and we click on whatever button we want. On a TV, a lot of times we're a little bit more limited to where we can, look at, click on the next thing. We'll have to like go, left a few times and right down a few times before we get to the tile that we want to click. Or like, if one row has fewer things than the other, and if we click down, what's the expectation that we're supposed to have, for the next item to focus? Is it directly down, or is it start in the new row? Does it reset the row? And these were, trying to like figure out what feels the best, or what versus the expectation of what people need, and coding for those challenges.
Okay.
Interesting.
So now, Tracy, one of the things I think that goes on here is that each of us is in such a specialized area that we could possibly even be using vocabulary that's not common to the other person. But you run a conference, and you spend a lot of time programming the different events and the different sessions you're going to have. What do you think is the best way for people who are in one side of the media industry to communicate with people who are in another side of the industry? How do you find the best kind of method for developing this kind of, path between these different sections?
Well, I mean, that's what we do at the conference. We really work hard to create conversations that are very timely and that address some issues that they're dealing with every day, but that they may not have known about another angle. So we work very hard to make sure that all perspectives are collected and crafted. I mean, that's what I do every day.
Right. Okay, so you do it every day.
I don't think I have a big reveal for you on that topic.
Well, no, you do. You do, because essentially what you're doing is that you're bringing people into an environment and having them have conversations, right? So,
yeah, but we work very hard to bring like people that are here on these screens together with people that people don't realize exist. So, for example, we'll bring establishment people, people who are working in the industry or in the news business, and we will bring very unusual, interesting, alternative news voices into that community. Or we will mix, advertising people with advertising people who are dealing with something on a completely unknown platform, because we have to study all platforms. So in some ways, we have a very wide breadth of knowledge because we study everything, but we can't go as deep, like perhaps as CJ does on advertising in her specific area, but we work very hard to find those people who do have that deep knowledge, and then we arrange them with people that they might not have known existed and have a completely different view. And then it can become very exciting. And people's like, oh my God, I didn't know that person, was doing that work. And that's what makes my job exciting.
So, when people actually say that you have to get out of your silo, they actually have a really valid point here. And when I've heard this before, I haven't exactly had the appreciation for it, but not only breaking down silos, but really having those interesting conversations. I think one of the issues, at least that I've experienced previously, is that it's a little bit hard to kind of say, I don't know something. And I don't know something, so can you tell me it? That's something that, you know, I think is important for anybody to do. But, you know, Peggy, if you think about, you know, in your role and what you're doing now, you know, do you find that executives kind of have a problem saying, I don't know something, and so help me create a strategy? Or is it something like they actually have a specific message and they're just determined to kind of communicate that message? You know, what's kind of the environment you walk into?
So it's all about the personality of the company and the personality of that executive leadership person, right? Because, you know, one of my current clients right now, they're really open. I mean, they know what they know, and that's great, but they also understand that they need to continue growing as an organization. So they're looking for input about, how do we communicate better what we do today? How do we apply it to a world that's really changing quite a lot, right? Because this company is more in the traditional TV world, but that world is changing. We all know that. That's why we're all here. And so how do they adapt? So they are open to hearing new ideas and understanding maybe what are complementary technologies that we should be paying more attention to, or is there something about what we're doing that there's an opportunity that we don't see because maybe we've been steeped in it for so long and we see things a certain way, that maybe you can help us see the market from a different perspective. And I try to do that with all of the different types of, I've worked with companies across the entire media supply chain. So from those that are in the content production end, to those that are enabling, to those that are in distribution, to those that are in storage and media workflows, to consumption at this point. So I kind of do have this pan-industry perspective. And I think I think part of it's because my approach is also pretty even-handed. I don't come in and say, oh, you're wrong, right? It's about how we all interact with each other. It's like, for me, I want to learn as much about them as they want to learn about how I can help them learn more about the market. And I think that's for all of us, whether it's advertising or UI or content delivery and AI and machine learning. It's about, this is a very collaborative industry. There's not a single company represented here on this call, this panel, that has an end-to-end solution. They can help enable each other. I mean, so I can look at, you know, what Heather's organization does and say they enable a lot for a lot of different organizations, but they do that in partnership, right? They do that in a collaborative way. I look at what Ginger does with UI UX, and it's for her, it's about looking at, well, how do we make these UI UX look fabulous across all these different devices? Well, all those different devices are manufactured by different people, different organizations. They have different operating systems that function differently. Each device has a different profile. She has to look at it from a really broad spectrum of how does that apply. So it's just how we all, for me, it's, you can't be a know-it-all on this space. I think we're all constantly learning because it's just so dynamic. But we all relate to it, right? You asked about what people ask you.
Okay.
It's been easier for me to say what I do in this industry than any other industry, because all I ever say is it's about everything we do is about enabling what you see on a screen someplace. Okay. And people love that.
Before Tracy goes to a question, because she's up next, I have a question here that got into the chat window. And so we've got, the question is, do you think streaming is more or less accessible to women than general IT tech services sector? So in terms of whether it's accessible to women, I think personally that it's a field that is can be challenging to work in, only in that you have to update your technical knowledge frequently. So I think it's accessible to a certain extent if you're willing to actually continually kind of be aware of what's going on. That's my thoughts. How about any of you? Do any of you want to weigh in on this? Do you think streaming is it more accessible, less accessible than other parts of technology?
It's tech.
It's tech.
It's tech. And I feel like we've all had this conversation before, that sometimes the excuse tends to be, oh, well, it's technology. And for me, that's not an excuse anymore. That's, groups like Women in Streaming Media are all of us coming together to help change that narrative.
It doesn't matter whether
I think it's tech. It doesn't.
High tech, high performance computing. Tech is tech now, right? I mean, and if you're interested in tech, if you like solving problems, if you like helping customers understand how they can do better, be better, fine. It doesn't matter. Just go for it.
Okay, so we've got.
I do think it matters where you're going into the tech stack. Are you in like UI UX? Are you in sales? Are you in business development? Are you in marketing? Are you in an SDE? I mean, it definitely depends. But holistically, as a woman in technology and a woman in streaming media who's primarily been in sales, I very rarely come in my community of interest at my employers that I've worked with. There's been very little women who specialize in that.
Okay, so do you think it's been easier, harder, or do you have any opinion on that, Heather?
I think it's been harder.
Okay.
Because I think that, fortunately, like I've worked with really great groups of people, but I think that, a group of men underestimate what it is like to be the only woman in a room in a technology setting, and the unconscious bias that people bring to the table. And even piggybacking on the question earlier that I get about being a working mom, being a woman, being a working mom, being a mom, being a wife, and then being in technology, and that unconscious bias, it's hard to get around. And so I have noticed that, and I think it's hard, but you also have to have the resolve to be able to get over it and just be the change. All you have to do is you just have to get up every day, and the only thing I can do is be the change and just show up every day.
I love that. Be the change. Okay, be the change. So, anybody else want to weigh in? Ginger, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, like streaming is all of it is all of it is tech. Either whether on like the sales side or marketing side, or like you have to talk the talk too, like understand the technology behind it. And then me on the engineering side of it, yeah, like I'm seeing more women now, like a lot of resumes we've been getting, we're getting more women, resumes from women, and but it's proving. We see a lot of ladies come through, like boot camps, like coding boot camps, and it's super exciting that they've like found parts like solving problems very interesting and fun, and they've like decided to change their careers and just try engineering and try coding, and that's always exciting to see. And so while it's getting more accessible to women, I think as long as what Heather says, like as long as you like have the drive and just show up every day, and and hopefully be fortunate to have an environment of very supportive colleagues who are open-minded and fair and just treat you like a person, and and it can be very rewarding. So.
Okay, all right, very cool. I'll let Tracy ask a question since she had one coming up, but we can, I'm sure, have this discussion about whether women find it easier or harder in streaming. But Tracy, what was the thing that you wanted to bring up?
Well, it's related to all of that. To go backwards slightly about the idea of asking questions and not knowing and being willing to ask. I just want to make an observation and then move on to my question. Is that okay?
Okay. Oh yeah, sure.
And maybe I'm opening up a can of worms here, but in the day, and because all of these political things are going on all around us, and I'm sure we go on Facebook or something, and everybody's in their silo, and everybody proposes to know something, and there's not enough of people being willing to say I don't know, and being willing to ask each other, why do they like this person, why don't they like this person? And I wanted to carry that into our workplace, because I think that I feel, and I wanted to ask you guys, do you feel do you feel free in your workplaces to ask questions, or is there an environment where people feel free to say, I don't understand something, and how are we going to figure this out? And then the second part of that question is, as women, how are you working hard to raise your profile, if you want to not only drive strategy and to be the one that drives the change, but also from my event perspective, we have to work very hard to find women to come in to speak you know, because either they're not being elevated to those public positions, you know, or the Me Too thing has kind of died out. But we work very hard to try and find, you know, a more of a diverse landscape of people to speak, especially women. And I'm just wondering, inside your companies individually, are you supported? Do they want you to be public? Is there not an opportunity for you to ask questions and to move your agenda forward? Like, how do you be more visible and drive that change inside your company? Have you done anything to do that, or do you find that it's very difficult because, as Heather suggested, the culture is still too oppressive?
If I can hop in there real quick, Nadine.
Sure, absolutely.
Just one of the things. So one of the reasons I'm doing this right now, this podcast and some other recent events, roundtable, and even speaking to one of my college classes. I've been out of there for 15 years. I asked if I could come back and talk about my job because it didn't exist 15 years ago. I'm personally trying to figure out, how do you develop a farm team, to use a baseball reference, so that if you aren't capable to speak on behalf of your company, how do you get those opportunities, and what are those growth experiences that you can get to develop your brand and to develop yourself, so that 2-3 years, Tracy, I might be on a panel at your events, right? So there's a lot to go around that. There's a public speaking piece. I know I just started going to Toastmasters, just things like that. I think there's a lot, we're going to complain about the panel makeups. I think there's a lot that as women we need to do to push ourselves forward. People aren't going to do it for us. I think whether man or woman, I mean, there's men out there that, try to make this inclusive. There are men out there that, are brilliant, but they don't have the speaking abilities, right? So I think one of the things is, how do you develop a farm team within your org, within your friends, to get better at these things? The other piece, and then I'll get it back, is also meetups. You go to meetups, and especially I'm blessed to be in New York City, where there's a meetup every night of the week on these topics. So I go to one of my favorite meetups is Beer and Ad-Ops on a Tuesday night in each month. I am one of maybe 15, 20 women out of 100 men. I think another piece is finding your wing woman that will show up to your event with you. I show up, I can sit in an Irish pub and have a beer, and that's me. But not everybody's like that. And I think we have to find our allies out there that will entertain these types of meetups, even if they're not in the space. To another point about breaking down the silos, perhaps they're in sales and it's all about ad-ops. Well, we have to work together. So let's go to this event together. I think finding your allies, helping to develop a farm team internally or amongst your friends, and just showing up more. Those are my pieces that personally I'm working on this year to advance myself and my peers.
I would say, from my perspective, you seem incredibly articulate about your space. I mean, just reach out, but some companies require you to have permission and stuff. But I would say people should be more proactive and not assume that you don't know how to speak, because everybody in these environments, they want you to be successful. They want you to feel welcome, and they want to create a professional space for you to feel free to say what you want. The more you have something smart to say, the more people won't care if you're articulate or not. See what I'm saying? Anyway,
and I think
it all depends on the company.
One of the things that we find is that if women are not able to talk publicly for their organization, there are definitely things they can do. CJ's idea in terms of asking your school to speak, great idea. Being able to run lunch and learns, perfect idea. There was a question that came into the chat box saying, because of the issues going on now, is this an opportunity for people to run more viral sessions? Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I think that one of the things, for instance, last night I was at the Seattle Video Tech Meetup, and it's a great environment for me to go and find out what's going on. Another part of it, too, is being able to kind of invent things, being able to both say, I don't know, but then how do I find it out? You have to not be afraid to do that, I think. We don't have a lot of time left, and we're going to before, right after we answer Tracy's questions, I want to make sure that we get a couple of minutes just to wrap this up. So does anybody else want to speak to what Tracy was talking about? Heather.
Yeah, one thing. I mean, when Tracy was talking about, or I think was it Tracy, whoever was talking about the meetup in New York, where they go, they have a beer, and some people aren't comfortable. When you walk into those situations and it's mostly, men, or it's not very gender diverse, my rule is, just stay for a half hour, talk to 2 new people, and then pull out if you're totally like, this is overwhelming. But if you can just set a small goal for yourself to just show up every day. But in those types of situations, set a goal of 30 minutes, 20 minutes, meet 1 new person, and then leave. And then slowly but surely you go back the next month and maybe you meet the same person and they introduce you to somebody else. I usually try to meet 1 person and then introduce that person to 1 other person. And if it's totally just, I'm not feeling it, then I'm out.
Okay. And Ginger, you were about to say something too when I cut you off. What was that?
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned like a lunch and learn, it's just like encouraging your women colleagues, just have lunch and learn, talk about something that they've been working on. I mean, they're obviously very knowledgeable and experienced, whatever it is they're working on. And it's like, they can hopefully be able to talk about it a little more confidently because they're very knowledgeable about it. Or even starting with I think we had mentioned like online forums at one point. I recently, I've been getting more into being more public about, my role in this world. And recently, even just contributing code to a public space, like GitHub. I recently did that for one of our more public facing projects, and it was kind of scary, but I realized the feedback I got from it was very friendly and helpful, and I realized, it's you got to take that first step to get it done and see where it goes, and it'll, the world out there might not be as intimidating as what you internally feel like it might be. So I encourage you to take the first step and submit the code or speak, internally, and take the next step and speak at on a podcast or, at a small talk. So
great advice. And I think one of the things that we wanted to touch on here was what people think. We only have a couple minutes. I'm going to quickly go around and just say, what is something that you think is going to help you for networking, or an event that you're going to go to? So Heather, you mentioned when you go to events, you spend 30 minutes if you can. Is there some group that you like to go to, or is there a conference coming up that you hope is going to continue to be run that you think? For
instance, if we go to NAB, oftentimes, I mean, I've been in the industry a while, so there's usually people that I know, but I, in particularly, I think if I look back to IBC in Amsterdam, Women in Streaming Media hosted a happy hour, and we had 2 new women employees, and I invited them, and they were brand new to the company. I think this was their first week, and they're at a trade show, and they're in Amsterdam. And so I invited them to come with, and I think it's just really trying to be inclusive, and even when you're uncomfortable, and change doesn't happen when you're comfortable. That's kind of my mantra. So when I look to NAB, there's lots of opportunities for speaking, and there's lots of opportunities to be uncomfortable, and that is how change happens. And so just show up for 20 minutes, have a beer or whatever, Coke, whatever you do, and leave.
Great advice. We have very, very little time left. CJ, how about your 30 seconds worth of advice? Or events you'd like to go to?
Piggybacking on Heather, I think I've been to NAB the last 2 years. I'm going next year. I think there was a dramatic change for streaming and the topics there, even from 2018 to 19. I'm really looking forward to 2020 if they don't cancel. And I think that and TV Week coming up in New York are 2 of the biggest things I'm really looking forward to. And Heather's point, one person there, it's like a snowball effect.
Okay, Tracy, quickly, you.
Well, I meet a lot of people at my conference, so I like to go to my event. And we work very hard to make sure that people get to meet others. We introduce people a lot. So I welcome you all to consider participating. But I would say that I love the fact that I've discovered women in streaming media. It's a whole new group of women to meet and to participate in. And thank you, Peggy, for letting me post announcements and news from our newsletter about all the different conversations and radio podcasts that we do. I really feel welcome, and this has been a positive thing, I think, for our community to realize that you exist.
So Dom cut us off, so we are now off the air. So
sorry,
I am so sorry you didn't all get a chance to wrap up what you're doing, but good conversation. Sorry about all my technical issues, and could have planned for that. Bye, Heather. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you guys in person and continue this conversation.
Yep.